Okay, so that concludes the public input portion of the item. And so it's before the council. We have Councilmember McCune.
Well, thanks to a lot of work with and by the community over the years and some phenomenal pulling together of ideas on the part of our city staff, I think it'll be pretty easy to craft a motion tonight, and I'll do that in a moment. But first, there were a couple of issues that came up in the testimony that I didn't address. One had been the validity of that air pollution study taken when the airport was closed for a few days, and I got to remedy that misstatement by talking to Ms. Ernst. I'm glad I got to do that. Another issue that came up a few times was that there are only a few vocal opponents, some people say, to the airport, who are homeowners who live nearby and are looking at their home values. And I just want to point out that while, yes, there are many people in Sunset Park and Ocean Park concerned about this issue, that before us tonight we have letters of support from the Pico Neighborhood Association, which is on the other side of Pico Boulevard, and much of it is actually north of the freeway. We also have letters of support from Northeast Neighbors and the Wilmot Neighborhood Group, both of which are north of Wilshire. So there are residents throughout this city concerned about what the airport operations as currently configured mean to our city, to our sustainability, to our environment, to the safety of our citizens, and to the children who go to our public schools. So this is not a limited issue, and if it was, we wouldn't be here all night as we have been working on this. The other thing I wanted to address was the I'll call it a canard, that if the council wants to close the airport, the only possible reason is to approve huge development on that site. I think former Mayor Feinstein sussed out the politics of that pretty well. Nobody would last here on the dais if they planned to do that. I also thought it was curious that one of the airport proponents said that Chicago shut down Meigs Field. And now there's wind whistling through the brush, nothing happening there. I guess there's no development pressure in Chicago. Part of my motion will make clear that my intent, and I hope the whole council's, is that we are looking only at low impact, low intensity use on this site. Frankly, it's not an appropriate site for the kind of development that might be appropriate in other parts of our city or the region. There's no mass transit anywhere near this site. So I think that argues for it. But let me try and put together a motion based on the staff recommendation. I think the staff recommendation here really lays out the direction we can take. But I would like to clarify and augment a little bit before I ask for a second, so we all know we're talking about the same thing. The staff wants us to well, part of the problem here is we have a written staff report, and then we had an oral staff report, and then we have the slide up on the screen. But in the written staff report, it said to continue to pursue city control of the use of its airport land. Let me say that again. It's its airport land. It's our land. It's not the FAA's land. One of the claims, which I believe is specious, that the FAA is making is that because some grant money changed hands, that we are obligated in some way till 2023. And so I would like to add to the staff recommendation, or maybe it's just a clarification, that we are more than willing to pay the money back to free that land. And we're prepared to write that check, and that'll be part of my motion. I understand the FAA has never accepted such a check, but that's their problem. Actually, if somebody offered me a check for that much money, but that's another story. So I'd like to make sure that we're making it clear that we are willing to pay the fee to free the land. The second part of the motion has to do with the future use of the airport land. And when we adopted the current land use and circulation element, there were a few parts of town we left out deliberately, and the airport was one of them. And with the other parts of town that we had left out, we knew what we wanted, and so we have since begun the process of what's called a specific plan. We don't know quite what we want yet for the airport, so we can't really do a specific plan, and there is no term of art in planning as an unspecific plan. So I think what I'll call it is a concept plan, and this is part of the staff recommendation, that we now begin to develop an airport concept plan based on low intensity use for the reasons that I've given and for others, and that we, in doing that concept plan, take into account that the quitclaim parcel may fall uncontested into our hands in 2015. So let's make some plans for that as a concept plan. Let's move forward with that. And then the other part of this would be what to do about the leases. And you may have heard, if you were here for this entire meeting, that at the beginning of the meeting, the staff revised the original staff recommendation and is suggesting instead that we enter into 3-year leases with annual options at the city's discretion. But I think what's key as we go and do that is that we have leasing guidelines that make sense for the airport. And right now, we don't. It's a hodgepodge. So I think we need to be consistent, and we need to direct our staff as part of moving the staff recommendation to come up with leasing guidelines that are sensitive to the environment, to the need for environmental remediation. For instance, if you're digging a hole and you're digging a hole and you don't want to be in a hole, the first thing you do is put down the shovel. So in this case, if there are things happening at the airport that are going to require ever greater environmental remediation in the future at greater cost, the first thing we should do in the leasing guidelines is say you can't be doing those things anymore. Those would be my clarifications and augmentations of the staff recommendation, which I will thereby move.
I'll second it, but I wanted to speak to it if I could.
Sure.
I'm sure we all do.
And right.
But actually, if I can clarify the leasing piece, and I don't know if it's friendly to I don't know if it needs to be an amendment or maybe we can tweak it a little bit. I'd like to recommend that we direct staff to sit or to review the recommendations that we had actually from the Airport Commission. I think they had kind of spelled out what would be permitted uses and what would not be permitted uses going forward. Actually,
Thank you, because I had it in my notes and I missed it. I think it'd be the most fair in going forward if rather than make something out of whole cloth, which could then be challenged as having deliberately been fabricated to discriminate against aircraft uses or something, we have, I believe, in our old zoning code, which is not in effect right now because we're in the interim zoning ordinance, but it's something we adopted 20 years ago, a set of standards for a light manufacturing studio use zone, which I think is very, very close to what the airport is at the moment. So it'd be friendly for me to amend my motion that those leasing guidelines should at least be modeled on the definitions we had for the light manufacturing and studio zone.
That's what you're suggesting. So you're okay with that?
So
that was the Airport Commission recommendation we heard from Chair Goddard, who's nodding his head.
Okay, good.
Oh, okay. Okay. Councilmember Vasquez, do you want to continue? Anything else you want to add? Okay. We also have other speakers. Councilmember Wintour?
I'll be supporting the motion. I wanted to ask the maker and the seconder whether they would feel comfortable adding something else about evaluating our options regarding fuel sales at the airport.
That'd be friendly to me as a subsection under what I said about environmental remediation. There's no doubt that with the industrial activity on that side over the years and the sales of fuel and our experience with MTBE and the leakage of fuel tanks, that there's probably a direct environmental issue with fuel sales. And we could figure out ways to limit fuel sales, to mitigate the impacts of fuel sales, even to take control ourselves of the fuel sales. I'm not going to specify that in the motion because what we're doing is we're directing staff to come up with these guidelines. But that interest and concern is friendly and in keeping with the motion.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Holbrook.
Here. Santa Monica has undergone a lot of changes during my lifetime here. Most of you probably know that Douglas Aircraft started over near Wilshire Boulevard, and then the location of that early plant is Douglas Park today. It moved over to a part of the town that was less populated, more open space, continued to work. And I'm sure we all are aware of history, and the history of what happened in World War II. Douglas Aircraft was a major manufacturer of aircraft of all types, really, and home for many models that still fly today. And of course, the city and every city in America did everything they could to support the war effort to try to save America from World War II. And we all did that. And one of the attorneys representing the aircraft people said he doesn't get it, why we're not smart enough or we don't seem to understand that the FAA has control over us. Well, it's really an insult to tell the owner of the property they can't use their property anyway except the way we want you to use it. And I find that objectionable. And I'm sure my colleagues do too. So you wonder, why do we fight that? Why do we fight that? Well, it's the reason is we don't want to be told how to use our property. Santa Monica has changed a lot. Ocean Park Pier was about 2 or 3 times the size of Santa Monica Pier, an icon for years and years and years. And its time came and its time went. I don't have any personal dislike for Santa Monica Airport, but I have been in the neighborhoods surrounding the airport. I've sucked in the kerosene fuel. I don't think anybody in this room would like to stand out there and have that jet blast blow them backwards almost. I've seen the pictures of people's backyard furniture flying through the airs. I've seen the trees turned inside out, and that's not an environment that any of us should accept. And I'm sorry, but that's the truth. The other thing is, remember Hughes Aircraft. LA allowed that to become a giant residential development, Playa Vista. I can remember Culver City Airport. It's gone too now. It's just Santa Monica is the last Indian standing between the Valley and LAX, and I suppose the government wants to make sure that nothing ever changes in Santa Monica. It's just not fair to the people who live with us every single day to be subject to these fumes. I think they're harmful vapor. I'm kind of amused. I'm an SC guy. I happen to have my shirts on. That the UCLA people are so divided tonight. You guys should get together and have a conference to decide what side you're on and where you all fit in, because some of you are for the airport and some of you are opposed to it for other reasons. But I just think that we need to study the future, look at what's possible, examine what it would look like with 35 or 37 acres in or out, and what our plans should be for the future. And we need to do a public study of this. We have the time to do this. Nothing will change at the airport till 2015. And then, of course, we expect to be in litigation, as the city attorney mentioned, probably for years over some issues involving that. But I don't think we should give up the fight. I think that the people of Santa Monica expect us to fight for them and fight for the property that belongs to the city. Thank you.
Councilmember Davis.
And I just want to ask the maker and the seconder, I don't know if it needs to be a friendly amendment, but just a clarification. One of the proposed staff directions is to return by the end of 2014, and I'm assuming that was part of the motion. But I'd also like to include with that, with sufficient time to do any CEQA analysis that we need to do, so that we're not sort of caught in a time bind, because our city attorneys advised us that there may be some CEQA work required. It may not be an EIR, but at least some CEQA analysis, and I want to make sure that that comes back in time with all the other materials, so we have sufficient time to do the work we need to do.
The timeline was included in the motion, and the direction is friendly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was going to say, well, I did want to add that Mayor Pro Tem O'Day was called away with a family emergency, which was unexpected, and that's why he is not here now. I did want to address some of the comments that were made. The alarmist statements about that there is some plot that this is airport land is to be developed into a century city. And frankly, I don't think the guiding principles whether people here would be reelected or not. I think the guiding principles are what we as a community develop in the land use and circulation element. The whole underlying principles in that document are that development will go into strategic locations. And again, that underlying principle is, as Councilman McCune alluded to and noted, is that it has to be connected with transportation. You're making decisions on land use tied to transportation. There is no transit, no rail line going to this area. There's no rail line in any kind of county plan to go to this area. So this is not going to be served in any future decades by transit. So it is a low impact development if there is any, or what would be on these lands if we are doing that. And frankly, the main other reason is these are public lands. The public lands are owned by the people of Santa Monica, and it will be the people of Santa Monica who ultimately decide how to use it. But again, in general, I think based on the guidance of the community coming together on the loose and the use of our other public lands, it would have a good public purpose. It would not be being sold off to developers for high-rise development or any kind of development. So that is just alarmism at its just not good form as far as I'm concerned. Do we have... And we have the city attorney.
If I may briefly,
with the city attorney?
Because what you just said, I just want the community to note, Mayor O'Connor and I do not always agree on development issues, but we absolutely agree on this one. And I think you've heard tonight that some of the people who want to keep the airport plan to scare you into voting against the airport being turned into something better out of fear of development. And I hope you've observed here tonight a commitment which I hope is shared by all the council members that the airport is never going to be some high-rise development. When I said that the airport concept plan should focus on low-intensity use, that's exactly what I meant, and I said it very deliberately. With that, I'd be ready to vote, except the city attorney has her usual cautions to give us, I believe.
Right, and I'll just add that conforms with our land use and circulation element that says we do allow development in Santa Monica, but it is in strategic locations, protecting 96% of the city and focusing it in limited areas. So we do have our city attorney.
I just had a question. I wanted to make sure I understood the import of the motion, which was staff's recommendation subject to the modifications you made. So tonight you're not making a decision about the airport's future. Tonight you're giving staff directions to come back with various proposals, various concepts. You're engaging in contingency planning. Do I have that right?
You do, and you know, obviously I'm very appreciative of the work that has been done in the community, and I started by saying that, including the airport to park people. And I know they have a certain direction they'd like to go in. There may be other people in the community who have another vision. Each of us, there may be 6 different visions up here on the council tonight. It's not the time to decide which vision is right. It's time to move toward evaluating what our options are, and that's what a concept plan would do for us. So, no, I'm not purporting to make a decision on the final use of the airport tonight.
Councilmember Winterer?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that I concur with the city attorney that we're just asking staff to look at various options and contingencies and not making any final determinations.
Right, and I think actually Councilmember Holbrook's really encapsulated it. We're going to study the future. And we're embarking on that study of the future. You said it well in those 3 words. So that study of the future motion contains that, again, this contingency planning is the underlying principle that it's continuing the city's control of the city's airport lands, that the city is willing to pay the grant fees, that we'll be working on an airport conceptual plan for the airport, again, based on low intensity use, and that includes using the western parcel that should be under our control in 2015, recognizing that and making sure that that is analyzed in that way. In terms of the leases, going with the 3-year options, and the leasing guidelines will come back to us. Those guidelines will be sensitive to the environment and environmental remediation issues, and the guidelines will also include, we'll look at comporting with the standards for the light manufacturing studio zone. That also...
Just to be clear, and my intent was that those guidelines would come back and be adopted before we would extend the leases.
Yes, right. The extension of leases would be evaluated against the adopted guidelines, and those guidelines would also look at things such as the environmental aspects of it, such as evaluating options regarding fuel sales, and that this will return by the end of 2014 with sufficient time to do and to identify and to do any CEQA or environmental review to recognize what that timeline would be. So that was the motion made by Councilmember Kuhn that was seconded by Councilmember Vasquez. So we're ready to vote on that. So we'll have a roll call vote.
Councilmember McCune?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem O'Day is not present. Councilmember Winthrop?
Yes.
Councilmember Holbrook?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Yes.
And Mayor O'Connor.
Yes, that motion passes. So that concludes item 8, and we'll now go on to our